Hello, today is Tuesday, March 12th, 2019. This is the standard SIG cluster lifecycle meeting. We don't have a very long agenda, but I thought we'd walk through what's there. If you can add details to the meeting minutes, that would also be helpful. If I can find the agenda, which I had open. First thing up on the list was to discuss SIG leadership. For those who are not aware, Robbie has found a new gig. He's going to be designing sort of the game engines that work atop of Kubernetes and working for Google in a different BU of some sorts. So he's said he would be stepping down from SIG leadership role. I had talked with Robbie informally, but I didn't see him send an email to the list. And he had proposed to me and talked informally about the idea of possibly having Justin step up into a SIG leadership position. So I think I'd pause there and see what Justin wants to say something about that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously everyone's very sad to see Robbie move on. I think I would be happy to step up and try to fill his shoes. It is not I think we've always said the SIG leadership is not a company role. So it is not a like Google gets to nominate a replacement, but I think I would bring, I guess, coverage of some of the projects that would otherwise be underrepresented. I think like I'm more involved in things that the two remaining SIG leads are not involved in. So I'm less involved in kubeadm and more involved in COPS and etcd and hopefully add-on management soon.
So I think for proceeding further, I think what we should probably do is maybe I'll write up, if there are other people who are also interested in SIG leadership, we should make sure that we at least entertain it and not just try to, make it a rubber stamp. So if you're interested, please let me know. You can feel free to DM me. And just as a PSA, SIG leadership is servant leadership. It is not, you don't rule on high. You basically have to listen to all the problems and help solve them. So that is the goal of the SIG leads. It is not a authoritarian position. It's a servant leadership position. So if you are interested, please let me know and I'll try to write something up, and perhaps next meeting we can just have a vote and then we'll call it done. Does that seem like a fair way to approach this?
Yes. Do we up to this point have any nominees, Justin? Or
I was going to give it time, so I was going to say Justin had talked with Robbie and is one of the nominees, but I wanted to make sure we at least do the due diligence and talk about it in the open, so that way if other people are interested, we can entertain that, and then by next week we can have a quick, or the next meeting we can have a quick roundtable vote. Does that seem fair?
I just say if anyone else does feel interested, please do. I don't feel that you would be offending me or anything. If you please do feel free to nominate yourself or others.
There are a couple of topics we could discuss from my side that I'm going to put them down at the bottom because they're kind of thorny and could sprawl. So I do believe that J-Hope, what's the actual name, was going to talk about cluster bundles. He had pinged me informally. So if he is here and wanted to talk about it, I think that would be a good time to discuss it.
J-Hope is Josh, and I don't see him yet. I need to put a note about something about the train. So we could swap the next two as well, I guess.
Yeah.
Unless he's actually here.
I did not see him here.
Yeah.
Did you want to talk about add-on management?
Sure. Yes. Add-on management. We have a KEP which is linked. The number is 746, and I think we've had a fair amount of discussion. It is a fairly abstract KEP at this point, saying we should essentially investigate the use of operators for add-on management, and it's not clear whether it should be a subproject or a working group. I think Lucas and I have chatted about that, but we would like to get the either sub-project or working group going to enable collaboration if people in this SIG think it is a good thing to investigate.
I definitely think it's a worthwhile thing to investigate. I'm not necessarily sold on some of the implementation details because there's questions that I had with regards to like the weight of certain add-ons, and as well as whether or not the pattern will always apply, especially for like air gap scenarios.
Yes, and I think I think that we can address that. I also am mindful of not like I don't really know where we draw the line between like, is the KEP supposed to be like a complete implementation, or are we supposed to get the ball rolling and develop more in the open? But we do have answers that we think will work for air gap scenarios in terms of Josh's bundle and registry mirrors.
I think cluster API was the de facto mechanism where we talked about things very abstractly, about the states of problems and the types of areas that we wanted to address things in. That KEP was very abstract and didn't actually go into specifics about technology or decision A versus B. Why don't I take a reread of that and see if I can potentially try to push the add-on management one into that direction, and then from there we can go ahead and do a vote and merge. It seems reasonable to me, just to get you unblocked.
Okay, that'd be great. And I think it seems likely that we will probably want a repo for creation of the initial add-ons. The long-term goal is the add-on operators. The long-term goal is that those would be owned by, like, core DNS would own the core DNS operator, but that feels like something we're not going to achieve on day zero. And I don't know whether a potentially time-limited repo falls under a working group or a sub-project.
Well, it all depends. Somebody's got to maintain these things over time, right? And working groups are essentially ephemeral. So it does sound a lot more sub-project-y than working group-esque.
I am fine with that. The hope is that over time we maintain less and less, because the real brains behind how to operate core DNS is hopefully core DNS, but we will definitely have a library and patterns to make that, and documentation to make that easier.
Yeah, so I think sub-project makes sense. And I think also that, or I guess that even that we need a repo, even though we don't maybe host the core DNS thing there, or the like kube proxy, or maybe the kube proxy operator will always be there. I don't know, like, do we need a kube proxy operator or not? Like, those are other questions, which is, I'm not going to talk about now, but like whatever add-on operator we are going to create as an MVP will be hosted there at the moment. And maybe if nothing else, we maybe need or want a repo just for the documentation, different patterns, and like how to clone Kube Builder in the right way for this thing to work, and like what are the development patterns of using this and that, and I don't know. So I think this sounds way more like a sub-project than a working group, because as Tim said, also pointed out, working groups are ephemeral, and this is something that's going to be like over time, that's going to own code for one, and we already have the SIG in place to own this. So it's just like KubeAdium or whatever COPS that we put a new repo. We could get a Slack channel or whatever, and those kinds of things. And I think it makes sense, as Tim said, and also what you kind of argued for, Justin, that although it doesn't solve at this moment all the problems or answer all the questions, we could like merge fast. And then that's, from what I understand, that's also one of the reasonings behind the KEP. So like, or the KEP process, that merge quickly, have it provisional first, when getting more advanced, implementable. I don't know all the stages, but they're like a couple. So at least provisional for now is good for me. and just getting this out there. And I also wanted to say that, or let Daniel introduce himself. He's going to be helping, or he's volunteered to help facilitate this discussion and help the add-on sub-projects execute in a timely manner.
Yeah, more or less what Lucas said. I'm Daniel, I work for Weaveworks, and I volunteered helping with the coordination of things, so don't expect me to write a lot of code. I will be here asking a lot of questions, and yeah, look forward to be part of the project.
Great. Yeah, it's always where needed with those kinds of efforts, and this is a purely kind of, or like to a large extent, coordination, like between CoreDNS and SIG network and all the other people in the ecosystem, and then like architecture should know what we're thinking and doing, etc., etc., etc. And providing, and why this hasn't really executed a lot since late January or whatever, when the KEP was created, is because we don't have the breakouts. So we don't have this meeting to discuss the details, just the like what we've realized in the past 5 meetings, report back. So that's why it's going to be great. We're going to, together with Daniel, then set up and Justin set up regular meetings and do that full flow.
I don't see why we can't just get started now and the KEP can be merged asynchronously, because I think we're in general consensus that we need to do this. And like we've been in consensus around this for how many years is it? What year is it? I don't know. So we know we need to do it. I just think the language of vernacular of like what is scope bound to, you know, and how we state what we're going to be doing may need a little refinement. So I'm totally fine if somebody wants to PR community and we can actually get this ball rolling. We could do the informal vote right now, which I think is a reasonable thing to do.
Yep.
At least it's recorded. And then from there, we can refine the actual KEP itself.
Yes. So how do we do a vote? In like,
we just do a timeout. So like we just say +1 in the Zoom chat channel, -1 for dissent. You have, you know, a timeout window of 2 minutes, 30 seconds to make your statement or forever hold your peace.
And this is then about creating an add-ons subgroup.
Yes, this is about creating an add-on sub-project for managing the add-ons.
Sorry.
It's a new thing. It's subgroups.
Yeah. Too many different governance things.
The add-on committee.
I'll give like 30 more seconds. It's wildly +1, so.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't also announce the option to have a -1, but that is probably an option. So.
I did actually. I said you can dissent. Yeah, I said dissent now or forever hold your peace. We had the KEP up for 2 weeks now, so we've mentioned it informally in the other meetings for weeks and weeks. Actually, it's been over a month. So the option to say I think this is a bad idea has been in existence for a while. All right, I'll do a 3 count. Any last words? Going once, twice, 3 times. All right, it's official. +1s across the board. Feel free to PR community. I will try to get your meeting set up for you as quickly as I can. And just DM me on Slack and I'll try to get the ball rolling as quickly as I can.
Thanks, Tim.
Did you want to send out a possible doodle or something to solicit times for that might work for folks?
That is a great idea. I think I guess Daniel and I will coordinate on that.
Right. So action item is Daniel and Justin will sync on Doodles and Docs.
Super. Thanks.
Next up, a wider discussion about some meta topics that hit the whole SIG that I had listed for a while. The first topic is artifact management. We are wildly inconsistent with how we manage artifacts across not only the whole project, but also SIG cluster lifecycle. Seeing how we kind of lead the pack in many respects with how we do and manage and run sub-projects, I wanted to talk about it with the group to determine whether or not we want to possibly have some unified frontier with respect to add-on management and discoverability and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This especially affects things like cluster API. So I'll pause here for a second and see what folks have questions, comments, complaints, concerns.
Do you think this ties into any of the work the Kate's Infra team is doing?
I think it can, yes.
Yeah, because it seems like they're building a unifying kind of pipeline for at least container images.
And binaries, yeah, as well. I would
I
ask,
haven't seen that work yet.
as I understand it, that's going to be mostly internal, not necessarily user-facing. Tim, are you thinking about something more than just having like nice infra for the various sub-projects, or like it sounds like you're thinking about discoverability?
Discoverability is a piece of it, but actually generation and having uniform like baseline images, uniform testing automation for release infrastructure. Because right now, you know, the way cluster API releases is we have a GCS bucket that, you know, we've been granted and we have to like sync through a couple of people to make that magic happen. And this should really be an automated system that we can push test infra to maintain and own, but having some unified way of building, some unified way of discovering this stuff is pretty important.
I guess another way to phrase my question would be, when we have the GCR buckets and we have the GCS buckets that are available for every sub-project, and Prow can you can create a Prow job and push to them, and we have some form of promotion process, probably through the registry image promoter or something similar. I guess what more is there that we should be thinking about?
I think the biggest problem we have outside of just the machinery is discoverability. Right? There are many sub-projects across the way, and no one really knows all the versions of things that are released. And sometimes the versions are different numbers than the versions that are actually released with the main artifacts for Kubernetes. So just having awareness of where all this stuff lives, if we maintain maybe just a meta jump point in the main docs, that might be a reasonable thing to do. Or it could be maintained in community. I'm not quite certain there. But what do folks think about discoverability?
I haven't been particularly impressed when interacting with GCR repos. It's usually with the command line, which is not super approachable for everybody, and requires that you have, you know, gcloud actually set up. Yeah, actually, come to think of it, I didn't think of that. If you don't have a GCP account, then I actually don't know of an easy way to browse a GCR repo. If there's some kind of user interface that I'm not aware of, I would love somebody to point me that. But when comparing the usage of GCR to things like Quay and Docker Hub, there's certainly a lot to be desired in terms of usability and documentation of those artifacts.
So it is actually possible to browse GCR without being logged in to a GCP account. It's not the easiest thing in the world. Like, it's not super discoverable, but I can share a link in chat, for example, to see everything that's in the Google containers bucket. But there are more user-friendly registries out there for sure.
I thought before we had the alias, you could just visit the name of, like, you could just literally type in GCRIO / the name of the image. But there is also another avenue of hope, which is, though we are using GCR as our infrastructure, the source of truth, at least for the prod buckets, is going to be the manifest that drives the registry promoter. And it isn't necessarily the case that GCR will be the only target. And so we could easily have, that will be, I don't recall whether it's YAML or what, but there is going to be a YAML file that will say these are the images that are in the prod buckets or are expected to be in the prod buckets. So from that, we now have a place where we could build, or we shall have a place, we will in future have a place where we can build tooling that may be more user-friendly and maybe more discoverable. I think there's still a need for what Tim described to sort of say, like, what is the correct cross-cut across all of the different versions? Like, it isn't necessarily latest of everything.
Yeah, I think a part of, there's two parts here. One is clearly on the onus of the K8's infra working group. It's clearly not our domain or dominion to manage that, but interfacing with that and making sure that we are doing the same thing across our sub-projects will help. But what is definitely in our dominion is some documentation that outlines, here are the versions that are currently in the wild and supported, and here's where you can go to get them. That information is scattered at best, and discoverability is not very clean.
Across what projects, Tim?
Yes, every single one.
So you want a curated page or set of pages that somebody has to maintain, or maybe there's automation that maintains it, for core Kubernetes, all the cluster API stuff, kubeadm, kube builder, et cetera, et cetera?
I do not care about anything that's not dominion for this SIG, but every sub-project of this SIG, it is my responsibility to make sure that people have discoverability and understand where to find things. So cluster API, COPS, Minikube, kubeadm versions, what's the supported version, what's the state of things, how we can find more information. A single jump point for people to find out how to install, manage, and use case scenarios behind the different things that the SIG sponsors.
Yeah, kind of to what I was talking about earlier is that an image on Quay or Docker Hub usually comes with documentation. You can either just pin a README to it, or it'll load directly from the repository. And so depending on how you have that stuff linked up, right, like the hub of images itself, or those artifacts, like whatever collection, is very encouraged to tie to documentation. So it's like, if I want to pull Hyperkube and then like have those artifacts be linked with the release notes, then what does that feel like, to somebody in ops? That's what I'm kind of hearing. Are we talking about the same thing, Tim?
There's overlap for sure.
Yeah.
It looked like Andy was going to say something.
Yeah, I don't know that I would necessarily care to go to a landing page that shows me, for example, both Minikube and COPS. Like, they serve different purposes, and I don't necessarily see any value in a page like that. I don't have any problems with a set of pages where one's for COPS, one's for Minikube, but the SIG has a broad set of repositories with different responsibilities, and I don't really think putting them all together on a single page, especially since it's probably going to have to be manually curated and will get out of date in a minute, I don't see the need for it.
It's possible to just link to the release pages and then have the minor description of what the project entails and its primary responsibilities.
Sure, that's fair.
Yeah. I think if we do that, then just a simple page of links like we already have, for instance, the page of all the different meetings for SIG cluster lifecycle, we could easily have one which is a link to all the release pages and release info.
Yeah, release candidates and CI artifacts as well. Documentation about that could go into an addendum in the same place.
Yeah.
Okay. Why don't I look for a nice landing home in community or inside of the main? What would people prefer, community or main documentation? Because when people are actually looking to use these tools, main documentation is the primary go-to location.
I would say that it's, yeah, in the main documentation, coming from the heart of, like maybe somebody who does not participate in SIG calls and stuff like that, like just needs to install a cluster.
Yes, or needs to set up a tool or a set of tools to do either development or cluster, or set up a cluster or set of clusters.
I would say that whatever that document should be would probably be very close to installation documents.
One concern I have is that this organization around just the tools that the SIG maintains makes a lot of sense to the people who are in the SIG, but I don't know if people are going to go looking for SIG cluster lifecycle tools because they may not know about what SIG cluster lifecycle is yet.
Well, there's a separate page for setup in the main
Right.
documentation, and I think that is a natural landing home, and it's been totally mismanaged. And I have a thing on my whiteboard right next to me that says, do the document destruction, which has been on the list to do. So I have to do that anyways. So if I'm going to do that, underneath the main setup pages, basically have a listed set of sponsored sub-projects and eliminate the things, or at least link out to separate projects that are external, but explicitly specify that these are not supported by the community, they are supported by external entities, etc. Any other questions, comments, complaints, concerns about artifact management? We're going to have to figure out and probably sync with K8's infra across the different sub-projects about how they're going to manage and release things going forwards. And I have no idea what the time frame for any migration of anything is at all.
It is as soon as possible, but I share your estimate.
Yeah. Next up is are there any last comments with regards to artifact management?
I just wanted to mention, Josh, I was going to do a bundle demo earlier, but I just arrived, so FYI. I put it at the end.
Okay. Next up on the list was CRD management. We talked about it last time. We said we're going to talk this time. For those who aren't familiar with the problem, it would apply to all of cluster lifecycle. The proposed solution that we hate the least, not that we like, is that we would treat CRD management like an add-on. And then we would actually have an add-on manager, which is still, to be discussed possibly a little later, be the manager of that lifecycle of that add-on. The idea is that the main Kubernetes itself would ship a core set of APIs, but that core set of APIs may not consist of a functional cluster. But in order for you to actually get a fully functional cluster, you need to install a set of basic schemas for your APIs as part of the bootstrap process. So I'll pause there for a second and see what people think about it. Every time I think about this, it kind of makes me cringe because I don't necessarily like it. But what do other folks think?
I guess I would share some experience with COPS where we had a similar thing with CNI providers, and we chose to bake in CNI providers into COPS, and it has proved to be a lot of maintenance work. So I can absolutely see why it is a nicer choice to punt creation of a cluster that includes key functionality like networking into a post-installation steps. In other words, can the tooling just bring up enough that you can then proceed, which doesn't block you from doing nice things in kubeadm or nice things in COPS or in Minikube or in whatever tooling you're using. It just like keeps the core simpler, I guess.
So CNI is a good example indeed. I think the problem with CNI that we get so many random issue reports, like people, they use a different CNI and nobody from the KubeADM maintainers, nobody has even tried this CNI plugin. And now we have exposed the way for the user to apply a CNI. But if we bake this inside KubeADM, we control what the users do. And Kind has baked the Weave CNI inside. And if the users suddenly start to use whatever CNI they want, we are immediately going to start to get all these issue reports. So this also propagates to the CRD problem, what to bake and what not to bake.
It seems like it would be fair to say that there's like certain supported ones and other ones are not supported, and still leave the tooling there for people to try to use ones that aren't supported.
I think there are clear demarcation lines, though, with CNI, CRI, and CSI, right? Those lines are very clear. There's a contract that has been specified via a well-defined, I'll say API. It's not really an API. It's like some standard set of interface, right? But there's a contract there, and there's a plan for how to manage that as part of a bootstrap cycle. With respect to some of the CRD migrations, that is very unclear to me. Different CRDs were required at different stages of the pipeline in order for it to actually bootstrap a control plane properly. So the notion of you'd have like almost stages of launch, right? Where it's a multi-staged approach where you need to know exactly what time you would need a specific CRD to be enabled before you could actually run give any certain type of behavior, like storage. The one in particular that we're talking about is storage. Right? You needed the answer to this is they baked it in the core API for 114, but they need an answer for this in the 115, 116 timeframe.
What will be the version skews between the CRDs and the main cluster? Can we end up in a situation where like the CRD will be not compatible with the control plane?
That's entirely possible, but I think it's up to them to do the version management along with it. We'd have to have SKU tests for sure as part of the, that adds to the complexity of the test matrix, right? Inside of the test matrix for like prow periodics, we don't even test the extension points for the main cluster. And if we're trying to do version SKU tests for different CRDs, that could be potentially explosive.
So on the deployer side, I think that if we bake a bunch of CRDs inside the deployment, the same way we do kubeproxy and core DNS in KubeADM, this is going to basically save us a lot of work. Because if we have to support every possible scenario out there for people installing custom CRDs on Bootstrap, I don't know how we should even have the time to respond to the users that are going to report issues.
So some of this phasing and dependency model is solved by Justin's proposal to use operators. Because that does create like a very fine DAG, because the operator can control on existence of a CRD and then migrate CRDs between things and between versions, and so there some of that has like a technical solution. And then if I understand correctly, the operators are supposed to be owned by the people maintaining the components. So that gives people a lot of flexibility to do whatever they want during the cluster lifecycle, right? Be it that you're upgrading the control plane version or whatever. But
ultimately, the inbound QA and issues that will occur will filter through this SIG. And most likely, if there's any issue, it will be on unmatched testing, right? So like, I don't know how you test all of this.
We bundle everything and basically provide the users with a scenario that is supported and upgradable, and we test this and we support it. If we start diverging with many different possible scenarios, we have to support a impossibly complicated test matrix. If everything decouples from the core, it's an explosion, like you said.
So you'd have to basically version add-ons lockstep with Kubernetes.
I mean, I would also expect some of the vendors of these things to do some of the testing. It's not on us to test every possible configuration of Kubernetes. That's never going to be reasonable, regardless of how we let users do this.
I really resonate with what Ben is saying.
Yeah, I don't see this as a particularly big issue. Like, imagine we had developed Kubernetes the other way around, where there was just an API server but no built-in types. So we would have had to have solved the problem of how do we get the pod CRDs installed? How do we get endpoints and services and all the other things? And then how do we get the controllers running at the right time after the CRDs have been created? And this problem, like whatever the solution is, would have already been there. And, we'd be adding more CRDs potentially to the core today, and they'd follow the same sort of dependency management. And you'd use something like kubeadm or some other installer that has an order to install all these things. So I'm not particularly worried about a test explosion, because we'd have a set of supported use cases and supported CRDs that kubeadm can handle. And then assuming we can figure out how to manage them going forward, it'll just fall under whatever that plan is, waving hands.
I was going to say, I think one of the things that does scare me is the idea that a CRD might have a hook, which might require another CRD to be operational. And how do we sequence that but allow CRDs to be written before the hooks are necessarily up, I guess. And that scares me a lot. I think in terms of managing the set of these CRDs, I do agree we should have a canonical set, and whoever tests it should not test more than one, or should not be required to test more than one. And we should devolve that as much as possible. And I think, I hope Josh's bundle work, which we might get a demo of, might be helpful there, so that it's not necessarily on kubeadm to maintain that either. And we certainly don't want kubeadm to maintain one and kops to maintain another and Minikube to maintain a third, right? And hopefully we can get a single source of truth, whether that's via kubeadm or in a external file that everyone can use, even if you're not even using a tool. Because there are some people that still don't use either kubeadm or kops or Minikube. Crazy people.
Yeah. Well, that might be a good segue.
So with an actual, so what's the state of the storage thing now? You said that they were built into the API server, but why do they even want the CSI types, which are needed for conformance, to be out of tree, even though they're built using internally of the APIs are using the CRD framework?
See, for me personally, I think it simplifies the problem to do CRDs for development, and then when you promote to standard API.
Yes.
That's my personal opinion, but it's not shared amongst a lot of the core API machinery folks. They would like to see it managed as a thunk, a separate thunk of basically schemas as an add-on, which has its versioned in lockstep as a thunk with the main revisions of Kubernetes.
Right. So it's more like this. I mean, I think that is way more of an architectural question, because it's if we start breaking things up, we can go as Andy said, unreasonably far. So okay, for this Kubernetes 1.15, you need to install the pod CRD, because otherwise you can't run pods. But if you don't want pods, you don't need to install that CRD, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know. I'm just of the. I agree that we should find a solution to the problem of CRDs generally, but in the case of CSI or something else that is clearly like a core thing as it's required for conformance, we should build it in. And I don't care if it's built using the legacy API machinery semantics, or if it's using internally of the APIs of the newer CRD semantics of actually registering that. But yeah, so that's the rant about that. But still, yes, I agree that we need generally, like for, let's say we have a CRD for CI/CD extension for that's doing something, then yes, we need to find a good solution to manage that.
Why don't we table this discussion for right now? And what I'd like to do is take this to the mailing list to start to hem and haw on it. I think we potentially might need to have a working group to start to discuss this problem. I don't necessarily want, it's kind of been thrust upon SIG cluster lifecycle, not necessarily something that we jumped up and wanted. So I think we should start a discussion on the mailing list and loop back in SIG architecture with some of the thoughts and opinions that I can try to distill from this conversation and see how to progress in the future. But I want to give Josh enough time to go through a demo too. So
yeah, just final. So when you said it's in the core now or in the API 7 now, the CSI things for 1.14, but we need to find a solution by 15 or 16. What do you mean by that? Do you mean that they suddenly will break out the API groups that have been there?
No, the other APIs that are being promoted, they would like to find a happy path for management going forwards.
Okay, so CSI is going to stay where it is, but just for other things that come up. Okay.
I think runtime class is the next one in the sequence.
Yep.
Yeah, very true. Yeah. Thanks.
Tim, isn't there a Google Doc on this somewhere? I'm trying to find it.
There are Google Docs. So I will link it all together in an email that I'll send out this afternoon.
Okay, thanks.
Josh, the floor is yours.
All right. So I'm going to share some work that Justin and I and others have been doing for GK and GK on-prem. So we've got this cluster bundle repository that we've been working on, and really the goal of the cluster bundle is just a simple, I'm going to remove this. Does everybody see this, what I'm working on? It's really a simple way to package up Kubernetes material. So I've got this bundle control command CLI that comes with the repository. I'm just going to generate name my app. Okay, so let's look. So this is just dumping a bunch of tutorial stuff, and the most important thing is this component builder. And like I said, pretty simple. It's a CRD or a CR with a name and a version and a bunch of object files. It's really the key idea is then there's this build step, bundle control, build, my app builder. And then it inlines everything into kind of one hermetic kind of component. And that's super useful because that means that we have this like unit of Kubernetes material that's versioned that we can ship around. Yeah, I mean, the bundle control comes with a couple of other things. That's kind of the punchline of the cluster bundle is really this kind of version set of Kubernetes material. It also has some customized like patching support built in. So if we try to do this build my app builder. So you can see there's this, well, I should take a look at this patch first. So we got a patch and it has this format. Oops, and I actually want v1, data1. And it has some schema that's like a CR schema. And so if we rebuild on my app and then type it back in bundle control and say patch with some options, file options, oops, sample options. You can see that the deployment, oh, I changed it. Did add it. Back to v1. And it should, yeah, it has the foo namespace now. And then if we want to get our objects out, again, we can do bundle control export. Then we just have a dash, a separated list of objects that we can apply to Kubernetes. And so that's kind of the whole idea, and that's like super useful because now we have like a really simple unit that's versioned and named that we can say apply, give to an operator, or we can have a set of these things, and that's like a cluster or so on. Yep, that's it. That's all I got. Questions?
So is this similar to basically a bunch of like JSON lib? A structured set of API types for which you can construct more API objects?
Did you say case on it or JSON it?
I mean, it's the same thing, yeah.
Well, I think it's a little similar to case on it. I don't know the format that case on it uses off the top of my head. I recall that they use like a directory structure rather than like a custom resource for packaging up their information. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. But I mean, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like sort of things that are playing around this space, and I couldn't find anything that was quite like CR with just Kubernetes material. So that's what this is.
How does the component type deal with things like the, object size limit? Like, is there a way to decompose it in multiple types?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the object size limit, if I recall, is like 1 megabyte. Is that right? Yeah,
1.5.
1.5 megabytes. Practically, I haven't run into that for single components. I mean, you'd have to have like storing some massive amount of data. Even if the largest set of components that I've seen is like 50K. But yeah, I mean, you could decompose, testing for a proud job. You could decompose the Kubernetes objects into different components if that works. I mean, it's just, right, you can, since it's just Kubernetes material, you're like, oh, I want to split this into a different logical unit, then you can split it apart into 2 components. From my perspective, like, as we're working on GK and GK on-prem, like this is mostly related to like applications. So you will have like the etcd component, the Kube API server component, maybe like a CRD component that has all the CRDs that we need to install first.
Cool. Thanks. I'm wondering about how, you showed the patch thing. How is that different, doing different things than Customize?
It's not. I took some of the logic from Customize. I've talked with the Customize guys. I think in my ideal world, the bundle control build step is like Customize build, and then it produces a component. I would love it if they could build components. That would be great. But also, there's one caveat though. So remember, this is like, we're shipping this to a cluster, and it's up it's kind of like a config map almost when you apply it. But this is not just a patch; it's a patch template, and so that allows us to do. It's like a Go template that then becomes a patch, so that we apply options to the patch template. Now it's like a real patch, and then we can apply it. So that allows us to do in-cluster modification of objects. Whereas like Customize is just like build time. It doesn't have sort of like a runtime component.
Okay, right. So for my thing to be able to apply component foo, I need to provide option bar.
Sure, right.
Right.
My IP address, right? Classic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Would we expect that, I guess it's expected that secrets and things like that would be baked into the component, and that we would use RBAC to prevent people from, having access to things they shouldn't?
That's an option. The component, builder component library doesn't come with any sort of notion of secrets. We've played around with several different options for secrets. You can imagine actually like a custom resource that says like, in the cluster, make me this secret, like a secret builder or something. Or you could provide the secrets inside the component itself.
Cool.
But I mean, you could, I guess, like sort of in my ideal world, we sort of like move more things to the operators. So you could have like, either like a library that does secrets in Justin's library, or like maybe a secret operator.
And
It's being used in many different ways. The question I have is understanding what tool would be used where, when, and why. It's part of like a given life cycle and how it applies. Like you could use bundle in very generic fashion.
Right.
But it isn't even germane to sync cluster life cycle, right?
Mm-hmm.
It basically like manifest patching for dynamic environment variables for your cluster. Very similar to the way JSON it is getting used, right? So how that interfaces with management of core add-ons or something would be a super useful thing to understand.
Maybe Justin can speak to how he envisions this working with cluster bundle.
Yeah, I have been playing with the bundle as backing some of these operators, and it is super useful for the air gap type scenario where you don't necessarily want to pull from GitHub, right? Because you're worried about GitHub going down or whatever it is. I personally have been putting more logic into keeping the bundle as plain objects and putting more logic into code in the operators. But I think it's very powerful to have the option. But I think it's also important to realize that there are like two levels, I think, to this proposal. There is the core bundle idea, which is we create a sequence of objects and load them into the cluster, and it's super handy to have them there. And the same YAML format can be used, as Tim says, for other tooling. Like we could have a tool which extracts a bundle object and just like pipes it to kubectl apply type thing. Just like a command line tool. And then there's the idea, okay, the templating idea to me is very exciting. It's under more development, right, Josh? And that's the one which I'm
right. And I would
not as much.
Yeah, so I think from our perspective, like the templating, we actually have like just a raw Go template. Those are kind of, I would say, like experiments. Like how can you use the bundle in real life? There's even imagine using the bundle to represent OS images. There's like a node object in the repository, which we might get rid of. But the whole idea is like, let's represent everything as custom resources, like secrets or secret builders or whatever.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued because this seems like a very simple way to solve a problem that we have in userland right now, which is that like maintaining collections of objects, like there's really not one good way to do it. They all come with very ugly caveats. The mixture of Go template and structured patching is like pretty cool because it makes like the normal things sensible and the hard things possible. Yeah, could you see like I have a question. Is there an ordering component to this at all, or could we build in like some DAG semantics? Because you could actually bundle a bunch of CRDs here, right? And then just like annotate the objects or wrap them in like a dependent patch or something like that, right? Where like one patch depends on another by patch ref.
Yeah, that's possible. I haven't really thought about, I kind of separate like two ideas. One is like a runtime dependency versus like packaging time dependency.
Yeah.
And right now how I'm representing packaging time dependencies, which is mostly just in the design phase, is another CR that's like a requirements custom resource. I haven't really thought about representing runtime dependencies. I think that's a harder problem because you have to worry about health and so on. But it seems possible.
Definitely like where a lot of my like hesitation comes from, as far as like being like so enthusiastic about another implementation from the add-ons subproject, because like we have a lot of userland tools that solve a large collection of these problems already, and for us to ship something in core, right? And then just give operators another bit of UX that they need to be concerned with in order to manage their collections of things is, we should be very careful about deciding to do that versus just letting the userland mature and then reaping the benefits of that. Yeah.
I also have a couple of other technical questions I'd like to ask, but we're running out of time. The main thing that I think is important now is, do you envision this becoming C+ lifecycle sponsored sub-project, or is that why, like, as part of, different or as part of the add-ons thing? Or was it just a demo that this is the cool thing we'll be doing?
I would love it if some SIG owned this personally. I mean, I think I'd have to like get Google sign off for that. But yeah, I mean, I'm like, my goal isn't right now to say like, I think some SIG should own this. But I would personally like that to happen. My goal is to be like, hey, what do you guys think? And are you interested? And sort of pre that step, we're not quite there yet.
No, but I'm just thinking about the plan. Like, where do we go, Tim?
This is weird. It weirdly overlaps with a bunch of user space application stuff and even apps world, right? So the application of it inside of add-ons is very germane to this group, right? But outside of that scope, I don't want to tread on other people's turf and don't want to start yet another holy war with regards to application templating and overriding, because there are, I don't want to get near that black hole.
No.
Right. I could imagine this being like two repositories ultimately. Like one is just like core, simple cluster bundle, and then a second one being kind of like, fancy stuff. And I think that would be a little bit less controversial.
Yeah.
And I agree with Tim. So as long as we keep the scope down, like really minimal. So in the same way as we did for Cubase, I'm like, okay, we're not even gonna install CNI providers. We keep the scope down like up to the point we get conformant, and that's all. If we find a certain similar way of saying, up to this point, we're going to do stuff with the cluster bundle and add-ons as operators thing together, but not anymore. All of it beyond this level is user space.
I think as long as we find that. This is yet another reason for me to go review the add-ons cap right now. while it's very particular to this, it applies to this conversation. So I think if you have a chance, we should review that and make sure that we don't get into too much detail, but allow us space. But I think the key to what Lucas is saying is that explicitly specify the non-goals.
Yes.
Those are the important parts.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks.
I think this does solve real problems, or this can be a solution to the real problems we have around air gapping of operators or add-on operators, and I'm really excited to try it more. And but we should obviously explore other options. But this, like in my experiment so far, has worked pretty well. Nice work, Josh.
We are at time, so I think everything else has got to get booted to the mailing list or Slack channel. But this has been a very interesting conversation. I appreciate everyone showing up.
Hey, Tim, I just wanted to jump on. I know I missed the beginning, but I did want to say thank you to everybody in C Cluster Lifecycle, and I've really enjoyed my time here, and I'm going to miss all you guys going forward. So.
Thanks, Robbie.
Hi, Robbie.
Thanks a lot, Robbie.
Thank you, Robbie.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.